quickly. I was wondering if I could ask you all to mute yourself just now, so we have less feedback, because sometimes with these Zoom sessions we experience some feedback. But feel free to leave your camera on. It's nice to see some familiar faces already. So I'm Tirza, for those of you who haven't met me yet, and I'm the community manager at Wild Hub. And yeah, thanks so much for joining us, special guest with us today. First of all, I wanted to ask you, or tell you really, that this session will be recorded. This is because not all the Wild Hub members are able to join in this morning. However, if you like to be taken out of the recording, just email me afterwards and we'll edit the session, so don't worry about that. So this session is about rapid adaptation to e-learning, and it's really down to some of us making quite a quick transition into working from office-based to now home-based and everything that comes with it. So we thought it would be quite timely to do this right now. But without further ado, I would like to welcome our special guests, Beth Robinson and Lucy Talent. And I'll leave it up to you guys to introduce yourselves. Lucy, would you like to start maybe?
Thanks, yeah. My name's Lucy Talents, and I've been doing e-learning for nearly a decade now, creating courses, following on from creating a postgraduate diploma that was face-to-face at the Wildlife Conservation Research Unit, Wild Crew, in Oxford University. And I shifted to online because I could see that we could reach so many more people, so many more conservation practitioners around the world. But recently I've started up my own freelance business because I want to be able to help other people do e-learning, both to study and to set up their own courses. And I want to also, I'm focusing on encouraging people to set up virtual conferencing, virtual networking, virtual meetings. And I'm driven to help people do better conservation by learning techniques, having access to sound learning, but also to help organisations and individuals reduce their carbon footprint, so reducing as much travel as they can.
Thanks, Lucy. That's great. Beth?
Hi, everybody. I'm Beth Robinson. I work with World Team, and my role at World Team is to design, deliver, organise the training workshops. So I do both class-based and online. I haven't been doing it as long as Lucy has, but it's been a really interesting process shifting to online, and we've learned a few things along the way. And at Wild Team, we run the main training workshops we run. There's one in project management for wildlife conservation, and there's one in strategy development for wildlife conservation. Yeah.
Thanks, Beth. It's great to have you join us. So everyone, we'll structure this session in that we have a few set questions already to both Lucy and Beth. So I'll get started on those, and then we'll have a little bit of time afterwards for you to raise your hand, which is an icon that you see pop up if you press on participants, you'll see that. So afterwards, I'll give the opportunity to you guys to ask some questions if we have time. All right, thanks. So let's start with the first question. Both of you, I'd like to ask you, what do you think are the main advantages of online learning? Just to get the conversation started, and also to focus on the positive sides of online learning mainly today.
Yeah, sure. So I really like online learning for many reasons, but we don't have time to go into all of them. Firstly, I love that you can have people from all over the world. In one of our recent training workshops, we had 13 different countries in one training workshop. So that was really cool. There's obvious cost benefits, so it's much cheaper for the people delivering the course because there's less travel, less accommodation, and also the time to travel. And it's also cheaper for participants, because as well as usually the costs being cheaper, they don't have to take the time and the cost of traveling and perhaps staying over. And I think another massive advantage is being able to fit it around your own schedule. So our training workshops are 3 days long. So if you count travel either side of that, that's quite a big chunk of time that people have to find in their diaries. Whereas if it's online, then it's, yeah, a few hours each week. So it's a big difference.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks. Lucy, any thoughts?
Yeah, so I think with online learning, it's a lot easier to make it part-time so that people can fit it around their schedules, as Beth said. But there are huge advantages to having part-time study, that people can keep returning back to the learning materials when they need them. So it gives them time to reflect on what they're reading, what they're discussing. It allows them to apply their learning in real life situations. So it's not that they're doing this really intense workshop, say face-to-face for 5 days. They're just having like this flood of information coming at them, and then they have to try and remember how to apply that when they get back to the office, and maybe they're not using that technique straight away. So I think that the online learning gives them easy access to all the materials, all of their thoughts and their conversations, and I think it's especially useful to help people, give them a chance to articulate what they want to say, what their questions are, what their learning is, in a way that is they have the backup of dictionaries. If they're studying in a language that isn't their first language, then they can just take the time and formulate what they're trying to say, and that also really embeds their learning. I think there's also another real advantage in terms of it being more egalitarian. So people who've got caring responsibilities, who maybe have disabilities, who have other reasons why they can't travel or attend a face-to-face training. And in terms of things like tackling unconscious bias, then people can decide what to share about themselves. They can decide whether they want to share any information on their gender, their ethnicity, their age. And so that allows them, if they feel that they're in a challenging situation, are discriminated against potentially, if they're concerned about that, then they have a bit more of a platform to avoid judgment by deciding what to share.
Thanks so much, Lucy. Those are really, gives us some food for thought, really, I find. Yeah. So in your opinion, and in Beth's opinion, do you think you need any specialist kits to run online courses?
In terms of hardware, I just use the webcam that's in my laptop, and I've just got a headset. So I bought a good quality headset because I know I'm going to be doing this a lot, but I think you could just do it with pretty much any old headset. I do recommend getting a headset if you're going to be doing a lot of synchronous, so kind of real-time conversations, because I think it just makes the sound quality better and easier for people to hear you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Beth.
Sorry. See, I don't use a headset, and maybe that's because I don't understand the technology quite as well as Lucy. Who knows? You can tell me how my sound is.
You sound great, Beth.
I do have a microphone plugged in sometimes, then that sometimes helps improve the sound. In terms of hardware, I don't think you need lots at all. Like, most people have cameras built into their laptops or computers and microphones anyway, and that's usually fine to get started. I have an external webcam because the webcam in my computer isn't great, but they're getting better all the time, the ones that are built in.
And can I just add also that we're talking about sound and video, that's really only important when you're doing synchronous activities. So when you're getting together at the same time and communicating by voice, but it's not necessary at all. You don't need any extra kit if you're doing asynchronous activities. So a lot of people will be working in low bandwidth situations where they know that the people they're trying to reach, or even themselves, they don't have great internet access. So you can do activities that are simply discussion forums and collaboration that happens when people are online and simply using the keyboard.
So what would be the minimum set of software that you need, you think, then?
So Zoom is great. I think we've got a bit stuck in using Zoom, so there's going to be a lot of other software out there that is available, but this is what we've chosen to use, and we really like it. We have the paid account, so only the host needs a paid account, and all the participants can have a free version. You could have a free version, but you can only do up to 40 minutes talking. So as Lucy said, there's lots of options. It doesn't have to be everyone online at the same time. The reason I like Zoom and I like having the videos and the voice, it kind of really focuses your attention, and it's much more kind of sort of classroom feel, but just a bit more 2D. And I just think it's just engages people so much more if you can see them, if you can hear them, if everybody can be seen and be heard. It kind of creates a more equality. And people can choose not to have their cameras on if they want, and they can choose to use chat function if they want. But I like having the option personally, but it's not the only way of doing it. Software, another thing we use a lot is Kahoot. So the website is kahoot.it, which I'd highly recommend. You can do that live, or you can do it where people do it in their own time. And there's loads of stuff you can do there on free. It's quiz software. It's a bit of fun quiz to get people thinking about what they've learned. So again, there's probably lots of other different ones, and I'd love to hear from you guys what other things you use, but that's the kind of the one we've got stuck using. And Google Drive, I find, is a great free tool that can be used for online learning. So if you are asking participants to give their thoughts, to put down examples, you could have that in a spreadsheet format, and everyone can see everyone else's examples and contribute to the same thing, same document at the same time, and it's free. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I really love those examples. So I completely agree with Beth. I think one of the biggest challenges of online learning is that people have a lot of distractions on their computer, plus they're not in a classroom environment. So they've got all sorts of kind of, you know, especially at the moment where everyone's families are in the same house, if you're in a country that's on lockdown, and there's just a lot going on. It's not the same as being in a classroom, and having that synchronous discussion over video conferencing, if you've got the bandwidth to do that, is brilliant, because it does it helps people go, right, I'm sitting down, I'm focusing on this now. There are still distractions on your computer, but it's that little bit easier to just be there in the moment in your learning. In terms of other software, I love collaborative stuff. So I've used Google Docs. In general, I try to choose software that doesn't necessarily collect a lot of data from the people that are using it, because I'm a bit of a privacy freak, and I prefer to give people options of choosing what data are collected about them or not. But the trouble is that often, particularly the open source solutions, are not as sophisticated as something like Google. And I think also the really important thing is that you use what you're familiar with. You just use the tools that you're used to, because in this current situation where everyone's getting stuff online in a hurry and without the opportunity to really familiarize themselves with a range of tools, then you should just stick with what you're comfortable with, or what you know your students already use. Other than that, software choices, I think it really depends on what kind of bandwidth you can expect your students to have, and therefore how simple an interface you need. Whether you're going to be doing activities together in real time, or whether people are just going to be able to log in, especially if they're geographically distributed, and just contribute to something as and when they have the opportunity. There are so many different ways of building collaboration. So online learning doesn't have to just be about recording lectures or having work in the like in a video call. There are so many different ways. So I love, like Beth's talking about, you know, her students build things together, and they comment on each other's work, and I really love that part of her teaching, and I think that is something that we can all aspire to. I really love creating collaborative data sets with my students. So a lot of the skills that I've taught in the past have been about analysing wildlife survey data, and I feel that everyone really gets on board with that if they have helped collect an example data set. They understand the limitations of it, they understand how the data were collected, and it helps them to make the right choices when they're doing the analysis. And it's just fun working on something together. You feel like everyone's doing something in a team in the same way as you would if you were in the classroom. So yeah, I'm very happy to help if people want to either ask questions at the end of this session or at any point in any of the Wild Hub conversations. I'll try and keep an eye on any questions where people are looking for advice on what kind of software they can use to help them get a particular type of classroom-based activity into an online format.
Thanks, Lucy.
Sorry, can I just add one quick thing to that? It's about bandwidth. And it's just something I've learned recently, which was really useful. So we do use a mix of live sessions and pre-recorded videos. And I just learned how to make the videos, reduce the file size of them. So they're much quicker for me to upload and much quicker for people to download. So there's some software I use called Handbrake, which I'd be happy to share with people for doing that.
That's really useful. Thanks, Beth. And how else could you recreate that classroom feeling? Because I've both heard you talk about that, and I was just wondering if you would have some specific advice on how to enhance that classroom feeling as well.
I think for people who've not met each other before, it's really important to give them opportunities to get to know each other. So try and think about ways that you can allow them to introduce themselves and ask questions of each other, to kind of, in the same way as you would when you're all sitting together in a classroom, you might ask them why they're wanting to be here, like what's their what work they've done in the past, what motivates them, what makes them passionate about being involved in conservation or whatever other activity you're doing with them. So just opportunities to build a community, not just through learning together, but through kind of a social engagement right at the beginning, and try and build that all the way through. Give them opportunities for just casual chat and finding out about each other's lives and about each other's passions, and it will just make them feel better connected, and that makes it easier for them to collaborate in their learning.
So it's really about building relationships as well, I hear you say, right?
Yeah, getting to know each other in the same way as you would if you were just, I don't know, going to get a coffee together in between classes.
Yeah, thanks. Beth, any thoughts?
Yeah, so I completely agree with everything Lucy says. That kind of, you don't have in online learning is that going to have lunch together or having a coffee together. And those are the really key times when you're doing classroom workshops, that people form these connections, they find out things that they've got in common. So anything you can do to kind of recreate those kind of just ad hoc random conversations is really helpful. And yeah, so what do they have in common? And we have a message board in our online training to get people talking, we kind of about the training, but also about anything that they want, and it's a platform that's theirs and they can use. We used LinkedIn the first time we did this, but it really didn't work. I mean, it was partly because we were new and maybe we weren't posting enough on there, but we didn't feel like the functionality was there. At the moment, we use Facebook as a message board, so I'll post a few things on there and everyone else can post on there as well and chat to each other. And it's a closed group, but there are issues with Facebook, which mean it's not ideal and not everyone's on there. So we make sure any important information is also shared via email. The reason I think Facebook does work is because people go on there anyway. So they'll be on there for some other reason and they'll be like, oh, look, this thing's happening over here. And they'll go and look at that. And that's why we've had quite good engagement with Facebook. But as I said, yeah, it's not perfect. And we hope to trial Wild Hub soon as a forum and a platform for people that are in a cohort talking to each other.
Yeah, so that's something that we can offer in Wild Hub, isn't it? We talked about that. We can set up rooms that are privately set so people have their own community in there, and it's a space to have conversations as well as share documents or links to video calls, or maybe like Google Docs, like you've been mentioning, Beth. Yeah, it's an option. So yeah, if anybody's interested in that, let me know. But I was also wondering, if we focus on like the current situation and everyone, is in this right now, we're all in this together. What is the best strategy, in your opinion, to make that rapid adaptation to e-learning, or to have this interaction online?
I think the key at the moment is to just start off with the minimum that you can, that's going to enable any existing students to be able to continue learning. Don't feel that you have to introduce loads of new technology, loads of different types of activities. I know a lot of people are very stressed about being in this situation where they're being forced to go online and they didn't. I know there are people in the higher education community who are concerned that if they record themselves and then put the videos online, then that means that then potentially they won't be as valued in the future. I mean, I think that comes down to a question of what your value is as a tutor and how much ongoing interaction you have with your students. So I personally don't feel that recording yourself and putting that online at all negates your value as a teacher and the kind of the community that you can build amongst your students. But I do know that people are worried about that. As I say, I know there are lots of different tools and ed tech that you can use to create engaging learning activities for your students, but there are some which are easier to get into than others. There are some that are easier to set up than others. So I would say, if you can, talk to someone who's used ed tech in the past. Obviously, I'm open to talking to people, but it can be, you may have other people in your community. If you're based at a university or another institution, you may have experts within there. Talk to them about how to tackle this in a gradual way. So it might be that the first time you run a course, it just has the bare minimum, and then you can gradually build in more interaction, more collaboration, more support for the students, more feedback to the students as you go along.
Thanks, Lucy.
Yeah, all really good stuff. And yeah, we're in a bizarre situation right now, and like none of us know how it's going to play out or what's going to happen. And I really feel that everyone's kind of coming together over this and sharing experiences, which is really nice. My thought on this question is just experiment. Now, you don't have to do it all at once, but have a go, have a play, see what's out there, and trial it. Trial it with your colleagues, with your friends, with your family, anyone who's in isolation and is willing to give you the time, and see what happens. And once you start rolling it out, and kind of don't, there's a experiment until you're ready, but don't let that hold you back from actually getting on with it and doing it. So, because there's obviously a need here to act fairly quickly, but act within limits that you feel comfortable within. But once you start rolling it out and get people on that training, then you can set expectations with your participants. You can say, this is the first time we've done it online, this is the first time I've run an online training, and then they'll be understanding, and yeah, because they'll know that it's the first time, and that's okay. As long as you've thought it through and practiced it, it really won't matter. And on that theme as well, it's really important, I think, to get feedback. So you might want to get feedback at the end of a live session quickly and just get a bit of rapid fire feedback, or it might be through a Google form at the end of the training, just a few quick questions, what went well and what could have gone better, and then you can adapt accordingly.
That's so true, yeah. And I think you're absolutely right, Beth, in saying, like, let's just experiment. And I think sometimes I feel like it needs to be perfect before you do something, before you implement it. But as we've done now with Wild Hub, we just open it up, and because we felt, now is the time for people to have that space to interact, to come together and create that kind of safe space as well, to interact, to get to know each other. And yeah, it's not perfect, but we're going to tweak it as we go. And but I like that what you said about just experiment and try out how, ask your friends and family. That's really nice, people to help you out until you feel comfortable using that. Yeah. And do you have any other advice or tips on how to create like active participation?
Yeah, so one thing we use for this is actually the same as in the classroom environment. Is we have a group agreement at the beginning of the training workshop. So we try and think about things that we can do as a group, so trainers included, that will make it a better learning experience, more enjoyable and more productive for everyone that's involved. So that will involve coming up with a list and asking everyone for their opinions about what should be on the list, what can we all do. So one of those things is often active participation. So everyone kind of agrees to be active and to turn off technology. So, you know, we talked about how technology can be quite a distracting thing. You're sitting in front of your computer, you could have your email up, you could have Facebook up, you can have all different things going on, and no one knows. And some people will have to have email up because they'll need to be keeping an eye on it for various reasons. But as much as we can kind of take away those distractions and all, as a group, agree that we're going to give it our focus in this group agreement, then that's really good. And another thing that often comes up in that group agreement is active listening. So really focusing on when people, if it is a live session, focusing on when people are talking and really listening to them rather than trying to do something in the background. And then this group agreement is, we can come back to this at any point during the training. I'll pin it on the message board and it will be there so people want to refer to it. And so in the classroom, I'll always say, you know, if we can always come up with forfeits if anyone breaks any of these things that we've all agreed on. And I've always suggested that in an online setting, but it's always a bit trickier to engage in that in an online setting, because yeah, you can get the group, not the trainer, but the group can come up with ideas of forfeits, such as people having to do silly things like telling jokes if they don't stick to the group agreement.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, Beth, again, she's demonstrating really good academic practice, or teaching practice, because you get people's buy-in right from the beginning, and not only that, they think about what their expectations are of their own learning experience, what they expect the person who's teaching them to do, and also it's really good for getting them to think about how they can help each other. There might be people within the group who have expertise in different things. Even if they don't have specific expertise, then they can just help each other kind of work their way through a learning exercise. And it just helps them focus on the fact this is not one-way communication from the teacher to the students. It's not two-way communication from the teacher to the students and back again, but there's this whole community and they're all learning together, and it just encourages them to realize that they can rely on each other. And to be honest, most people don't need that encouragement to realize it. It's there. They already recognize that they're learning alongside each other. And I do really strongly recommend that kind of online learning where you're taking a cohort and you're guiding them through. And obviously in this situation, that's what a lot of people are having to do. But if you're setting up your own e-learning in the future, then I really recommend having people learning together rather than just opening up a resource. Well, you could do that as well, but I really believe that people learn best in a community.
Yeah.
In terms of right now, having an awareness of what their current situation is. So it might be that it's more difficult for them to study online than it normally would be. If they've got caring responsibilities, they may be ill themselves, they may lack internet access or be having to share it with lots of other people in the household. They might not have a private study space. And my experience on all the Zoom calls I've done in this last week or two is that everyone's really understanding. Like sometimes my child will run in and want some attention, or sometimes, you know, I'll spill a cup of tea or something, and everyone's been super understanding. And I think that you can expect your students to be understanding as well. And then just in more general terms, I think that it's really important in terms of engaging active participation, again, to get them working on something together, to give them time for reflection. So deliberately build reflection into your learning activities. So say every day or every week, they need to spend a little time. You give them a few reflective questions about even just as simple as what's the most useful thing they've learned over these sessions, what's their next big question, or something a bit more specific to what they're actually learning about with you. And then that helps them to focus on where their knowledge gaps are, and that will help them to be a bit more proactive about asking for what they need from you, from the learning materials, and from their peers, and give them feedback as much as you can within the constraints that you have in terms of time or familiarity with technology, and encourage them to give feedback to each other if you can, because again, if they feel like they're getting useful information on their progress, it will motivate them to keep studying and keep coming back and keep engaging in that community.
Thanks, Lucy. Yeah, I do recognize that. I think it's also building that agency within the learners themselves, isn't it? That I hear you say, that they have the time to reflect and identify their gaps, like you say. And I think that's a really powerful thing. Another thing that I find really powerful, and Beth, what you're saying about active listening, it's so true. And I think it wasn't that until I read a contribution by Jamie Copsey on active listening that I was like reminded of that again myself. So he published it on Wild Hub. He was one of our first, if not the first contributor. And yeah, I would really recommend reading it, because it's just, it really rings true, I think. I just have 2 more questions for you both, and then we'll open it up to everyone else to ask questions, if that's all right. I just wondered, is there any other potential barriers that we haven't discussed yet in terms of that people might experience for people to be participating in e-learning?
So I think the biggest barrier is that people aren't familiar with the software, and it takes time to learn how to use new software of any kind, and it also there's a bewildering array of different software, different ed tech tools, different web apps out there, and it's really hard to know what to choose. So if you know anyone else who's doing e-learning, ask for their recommendations, ask for their help setting it up. I'm sure everyone will be willing at this point to give you a little time to help you get going. And be aware that your students also, your learners, aren't necessarily familiar with the software. So again, like as Beth says, I think everyone's really understanding of the situation that we're in, and that your learners will know that you're not this isn't necessarily your choice for how to teach, but that you're all in it together, and that you're doing your best for them to enable them to continue learning despite the fact that we can't necessarily meet together face to face. So I think there'll be understanding. Be understanding with yourself. Don't feel that you have to challenge yourself to do too much at once, and just generally be kind of mindful of how you're feeling about things. Ask for help when you need it.
Thanks. Beth,
yeah, that's all really great advice, Lucy. I think I kind of touched on it before, like now I guess we're all kind of shifting to e-learning, but often if you are somebody who gets more anxious around people and in crowds, then you're more likely to be drawn to the e-learning route rather than being in a classroom with people. So this goes for anything really. There's going to be people in that group, if you've live sessions or non-live sessions, that are going to be more anxious about participating. They might feel like they're not justified in giving their opinion, either written down or contributing to a discussion that's written or in a live session. So that can be a barrier for some people's learning, and finding ways to encourage people and make sure that they realize that everyone's opinion is valid. There's only so much you can do. Some people will kind of be much more passive observers of the training, and that's fine. If that's the way that they feel most comfortable, then it's also important to make sure that that's acceptable. But where possible, if you can encourage people to engage in their own way, then yeah, navigating that is really important. And in the live sessions, some people keep their cameras off, that's fine, and some people will prefer not to speak out loud, because especially on Zoom, you're not quite sure when to talk. Sometimes it can be a bit awkward because you start talking over someone. So the hands up function is brilliant for that. But also, if people feel more comfortable just writing in the chat, then yeah, that should also be encouraged. And on that same theme, Zoom has a really useful function called Breakout Rooms. So we have a live session and we have maybe 15 people in the live session. it can be a bit intimidating talking to that many people that you don't know in that setting. So we use the breakout rooms where people are kind of split into smaller groups, and then you can completely control what size groups they are. So you might have 5 groups of 2 people each, and they just chat amongst themselves on a topic or some sort of challenge that you've given them. And we find we get a lot of positive feedback from breakout rooms, because it just makes it all a lot easier to have those conversations.
I love those breakout rooms like you do with the training that I'm on right now, Wild Teens training. It's really nice to be able to have that contact with somebody else in the group, another learner. So yeah, and actually, so Beth recorded a video on Zoom, how to work with Zoom, including the breakout sessions, and she published that only yesterday, and it's on Wild Hub in the e-learning room. So if anybody's interested in how to do that, she demonstrates it perfectly. And I've been using Zoom for a year now, but I still learned many new things. So I would recommend you watching it. And also Lucy just demonstrated that you can also use the chat in Zoom. So if after my last question, you'd like to ask your question to Lucy and Beth, yeah, you can put it in the chat, or like Beth said already, you could do the raise hand option, which will come up if you press participants, and then I'll give you all a turn. Because we still have some time left. But just for the last question that I had for you, I was wondering, because it seems like we are all interested in e-learning, and how, because I realized this is only the start of the conversation, how do you think we could best continue that conversation and create like a support network to help each other?
Yeah, so this is a really good question, and I think there's going to be loads of expertise in this group and more further afield that we can all share, and whether that be a particular knowledge of software or hardware, or even just basic well, not basic, but just learning theory that applies to any scenario that people are creatively thinking about applying to the online environment. I would strongly encourage people to post on Wild Hub, and posts are great. So if you've got you want to write something and post links, etc., brilliant. But I'd massively encourage short video tutorials, and I know those can be really cringy. The more you do them, the easier and the more normal they get. And Wild Hub is a really nice, safe space to practice video tutorials and about anything. So I did the one about Zoom yesterday. It's a bit goofy, it's a bit weird. I'm sure I missed loads of stuff, but hopefully everyone will be nice about it. So yeah, if you've got any software that you've discovered and you want to share, then it could be a 2-minute thing, put it up there. And I think that would be really valuable and a really nice way of sharing things.
That's a really great suggestion. I'll have to think about whether there are things that I think would be useful to people. So I think for me, because I've worked mostly in an academic environment, but right now I'm really keen to support people also in the conservation practitioners and NGOs and other organisations. So for me, it's about learning what kind of support people need. So I would really like to hear from everyone on this call and anyone who's watching the video later on, what kind of support you need, not just what your questions are, but if there's something particular you're trying to use and you can't get it to do what you want to do, or if there's a particular activity that you want to recreate and you're not sure how, or how to structure it. Forget about not necessarily the software you use, but just how to structure it, how to give instructions to students, when and how to get involved yourself in what they're doing. But if there's anything that's stressing you out about your current situation, if you just want to share how you're feeling and the things that are difficult for you, even if you're not directly asking for help with them, I think that also really helps everyone in the community understand what people are going through, and it helps people like me and Beth and Tirza to know how we can best support you through this, and when this is all over, beyond in your kind of greater capacity building journey in conservation. So yeah, do absolutely share things on Wild Hub, but if you feel that there's a way of connecting with people beyond that, or bringing them into Wild Hub if you feel like it's a useful resource, which I certainly hope it will be, then do make them aware of the conversations that are going on, or the findings that you have, or the things that you want to share in other channels beyond Wild Hub. So we want to reach out to people where they are already, and if they're interested, it'd be lovely to see them in Wild Hub too.
I agree. Yeah, so true. Well, we have our first question already. I don't know if that's
Great.
that all right? So we dive right in. So Ross is here from Australia, or he's based in Australia, and he asks, what considerations are important when creating or redesigning material for e-learning compared with classroom? Thank you, Ross.
I think that it's important to bear in mind that it takes everybody more time to do anything when you're doing it online. Not just to, I find that it takes longer to create e-learning than it does to create classroom teaching. You have to be a bit more explicit about the instructions, because you're not necessarily there for people to tap on your shoulder if they're not sure what they should be doing. Ideally, if you can, you build in some automated feedback, which means that people can access help even if you're not online at the time, if they're in a different time zone, or if you're simply just focusing your attention elsewhere. But it'll take all the learners more time to do any activity that you're planning. So just build in extra time and a little bit of extra written or kind of audio recording support for them to guide them through.
Thanks. Beth, any thoughts?
Yeah, that's all great advice. I would say come back to what the purpose of that activity is. To very much think, okay, well, what were we trying to achieve here? And then how can we recreate that online? If we're just trying to share ideas or examples, then maybe just a simple Google Sheet. If we want a discussion, then actually, if you've got live sessions, and a discussion can be had in a very similar way online as it can be done in the classroom. You just use the breakout rooms in Zoom. But yeah, for me, it'd be coming back to that core question of what is the purpose of this activity, and then starting to build it up again from there.
Yeah, and I think also, sorry, I've lost the train of my thought there. So yeah, it's really good. That's right, I got it. As Beth says, it is really useful to go back to what it is you're trying to achieve with that particular learning activity. And if you're already using a virtual learning environment, a VLE, or a learning management system, an LMS, one of the problems with e-learning and edtech is that there's way too many acronyms. But if you're already in a situation where you're using that, then see if what you want to do can be accomplished with the tools that you already have access to, that are already built in. If that's not the situation that you're in, have a think about tools that you're familiar with already. Can you do something approximating what you want to do, what you would normally do in a classroom, using those tools you're already familiar with? And once you've gone through that checklist, then start looking around, asking people for advice on new software that is new to you. So definitely try and work with what you've got easy access to first. It's amazing what you can do with tools you're already familiar with just a little bit of creative thinking, a little bit of asking other people how they use the tools. And even you can ask your students, if you've already got learners who you're working with, whether they think an activity will work using that particular tool, whether they think that's an exciting way of doing it.
Thanks, Lucy. We also have a question from Ellie. I hope I pronounced your name okay.
Yeah.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, it's a question for Beth about Kahoot. I'm just wondering if you used a free version of it, because we did your training course and found it really, really good. So we liked our e-learning.
Don't tell Kahoot, but yes, I use a free version.
Okay, that's brilliant.
Let me know if you start using it and you find anything different. But yeah, we use a free version and find that's fine. There's certain limits on like the type of music you can play or things like that, which really don't matter too much. So,
great, thanks.
Kieran's raised his hand as well.
Yeah, Kieran, welcome.
Hi there. I was just wondering, I was thinking about, so I'm quite interested in using using e-learning to maintain and create communities. We have a big volunteer network that we were engaging face to face. And I noticed that Beth has mentioned with PMWC and the other stuff that you do, you create these cohorts. And I was just wondering what the thinking is behind a cohort versus a ever expanding community that you add to. Because my concern would be that with a cohort that it will fizzle out, whereas you might have one or two people that want to remain active. So I was just wondering if there was specific thinking behind it, or if you'd tried both and what you'd found.
Yeah, so for us, we have tried in the past, we had a website where people work through things at their own pace, so a non-cohort thing, and I think the dropout rate from that's probably quite high. You didn't have a cohort, you didn't really have any connections with anyone. It was quite solitary, working through the activities. There was a chat room, like a forum, but no one really used it. So yeah, and then now we switched to doing the more cohort kind of learning. I think it's, yeah, people, because they can connect and learn from each other as well. There's a much richer learning experience there. But I see your point about having some kind of community that goes beyond. And what we're hoping to do is, so we'll have our cohorts, and if, perhaps when we switch to Wild Hub, we'll have a cohort message board room. I think, is that the technical term?
Room, yeah, I think we use rooms, but either way.
A room for each cohort, but then we'll also have an overall alumni one. So once everyone's finished the training, they'll go into the alumni one, and then the conversation can kind of flow on from there.
And I'd also say, Kieran, that given the situation that you've described, I think for Beth and I, we in the past have mostly been, correct me if I'm wrong, Beth, but we've mostly been teaching specific sets of skills. So there's kind of a very clear start and end point for whatever we're putting on in our e-learning courses. Whereas for you, if you're building a community, then I think you have the opportunity to just do it whichever way you think is going to work best for your community. So what I would encourage is that you have a resource or a place for them to gather that enables them to have conversations within the community. But if you want people to get engaged in it, then the best thing to do is also to give them reasons to be coming back to that community regularly, whether it's a challenge that you get to do them to do together, or whether it's a question that you pose that you want them to kind of help each other answer, or whether it's some kind of just-in-time short learning activity. So you do a webinar or you put on like a very short kind of like several hours of their time, or even just 20 minutes of their time, then they learn something discrete and they can discuss it, and it just gives them that reason to keep coming back to that community. So you're making it useful to them in an ongoing sense, and you're encouraging them to make those connections so that then you reach a critical mass, which is really hard to do, I have to say, but then you've got them, they're getting enough value from the community and they're being reminded about it regularly so that they keep coming back to get engaged. And you sound like you're in a great position if you've already got a community of people that you engage with face to face, and they're now feeling lost and wanting to get back in touch with each other in another way.
Thanks, Lucy, and thanks, Kieran, for your question. Also, yeah, feel free to get in touch afterwards just to discuss this over a call or email. We also have a question from Ian, if I pronounce your name correctly. Ian, would you like to?
Yeah, you did pronounce it correctly, yeah. So I work in a university, and the situation right now is unusual for us. And one thing that we're struggling to do is to create some kind of experiential learning. So we've got to replace field trips with something online, and we just don't really know how to do it. And I know that lots of the stuff that you teach would involve understanding, at least being in real world situations. So do you have advice for how to do that with e-learning?
I think that, I mean, it's something, so with the kind of skills I've taught in the past, I expect people to already know how the fieldwork works, and then they've got the data. But I know you're not alone in this. So a couple of the mailing lists that I'm a member of, they're actively talking about how to do biosciences field trips. That they're talking about how to do geophysical field trips online in a virtual environment. So I know there are people who are doing really funky stuff with VR and AR, so virtual reality and augmented reality. That's not open to everyone, and it also, of course, in some situations, like with the VR, it requires people to have access to a headset. So that's not something that is possible for most people. I'm very happy to have a look. I haven't been reading those messages in detail, but I can have a look through and see if there's anyone I can put you in touch with, or any ideas that come out of that. It also might be worth you joining some of the mailing lists yourself, and I can put links to those into the Wild Hub room as this recording is posted. Yeah, so it is a challenge. It's definitely a challenge. There are resources out there in terms of people kind of creating online environments where students can collect data in some random way. So I'm not quite sure. Maybe you could say what kind of fieldwork you would normally do with your students.
Yeah, so at the moment it's a lot, mostly related to ID. So for them, they would usually go out and they would ID species and collect data on that. So it's sort of first year undergraduate type stuff. Hopefully we're not going to have to postpone or replace our overseas courses, because that's going to be a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just a complete unknown as to what's going to happen over the next few months. So I think the best way to start is to take a step back, as Beth has said, and think about what your learning objectives are. Why is it important for them to learn the IDs? What about that process is it that you want to get out of it? How are they going to use it in the future? And then have a think. So I know that there are resources. For example, when I was back at Oxford University, there were people developing resources that had kind of 3D images of different types of historical artifacts, but they were thinking of starting to do them for plants and insects. So it may be that there are online herbarium specimens that you can use. So there may be resources where it's not as fun as going out and collecting stuff, but there may be ways that you can give them challenges in terms of identifying stuff without going outside. Beth, have you got any ideas?
So I've seen a few things online recently. There's dissections online, which I quite want to try out myself because it sounds fun. But another thought that came to mind, and there's a tricky thing here because you don't want to discriminate against any of the students. So some will have access to gardens and some will not. So my initial thought was, well, can you get that kind of experiential? They go out in their garden and they, even identifying slugs. I can't identify all the slugs in my garden. That would be a cool thing to learn. Or the birds, or kind of bird song and that thing, kind of sharing those things. And even if they live in a flat, then there's still hopefully some sort of bird song they can hear and share that. And there's kind of learning. If there's not like you have to learn this many birds, if it's just learning to be observant, then yeah, it'd be interesting to see what they can do from where they are.
That's so cool, Beth, because Kieran just put on the chat, we're actually looking into online slug course.
Nice.
FSC BioLinks. So cool. And Chloe shared that there's a free phone app, or there's multiple free phone apps where you can record bird songs and get the idea. That's so cool. Thanks, guys, for sharing. And I was also thinking, because I was talking to somebody at Gloucester University who's teaching in ecology, and so we were like brainstorming the same thing, like could you go out for a walk, record how to ID species or to do some kind of assessment that they need to practice themselves, and could they use their daily walk to do the same, you know? Or another friend of mine in the Netherlands, she gives training in animal behavior. So she's been posting videos training her rabbits, helped by her little son feeding the things to the little foods, basically. To yeah, it's just so fun. People get creative. So I hope these tips helps.
Yeah, if they've got phones, they could do photos or video diaries or something like that.
And at this time of year, maybe if they're leaving the windows open, they can get little things flying in. You never know, like what can they find around their house? Can they identify it?
We also have a question from Gwilly. Thanks, Gwilly. I'll just try to recap. So he's planning to run a stakeholder workshop in Kenya, but now wants to run it remotely. And it would involve introductory presentation, potentially as a prepared video, followed by a scoring exercise for individuals. Then another presentation with feedback, followed by breakout groups to build consensus across stakeholder groups. And if there was any guidance on whether this was possible through one platform, and otherwise it would involve like multiple emails, an e-survey, maybe through Zoom, or maybe similar for the consensus building. Is there any kind of recommendation on that?
Sounds like a really interesting thing, and I definitely think you can do that remotely. It's not the same as being there, but there's definitely a lot to be gained from doing it remotely. My initial thought is, yeah, don't be worried about using lots of different formats. So sending them a pre-recorded video, you just send a link in an email, and all they have to do is click here where you link it to, and it opens up and they watch it, and then you have the sessions within Zoom for breakout rooms, etc. Would be brilliant. And if there's some sort of scoring exercise, then my default is usually Google Docs. So have a Google spreadsheet, set up some sort of process they can follow. In our strategy development for wildlife conservation, which is the manual's freely available online, there's a bit of a stakeholder engagement process on there. If there's anything that's useful, the documents are all there for free, so feel free to take them. I know Chloe, who we've also got in the call, is an expert on stakeholder engagement and does training there, so she might be a good contact for you to run ideas from about that.
And yeah, I mean, I think Beth is right that whilst it's great if you want to run this as a single workshop that's kind of over the 3 hours or whatever it would be, one block of time, if you feel like that's going to work best for your participants, then you can do that, and you could do it in Zoom with opportunities for them to go and do their feedback. So I don't quite, because I haven't done that kind of work myself, I don't quite understand what the scoring exercise would involve. So I think there are elements of it that would work well in Zoom. I think it would also be possible to do it in an asynchronous discussion format if you feel so. For example, the building consensus, I think that would work best if you can get people on video together or on audio together, but I think it could be done in a discussion forum if you had to, if they don't have good enough bandwidth for that. I also think with the pre-recorded video, it would be really great if you had a reflective exercise or some questions that follow the video. So just so that they can check that they've understand it. They can show you that they've watched it. So maybe you can say, well, I mean, I'm just assuming that in this time people find it difficult to motivate themselves. Pre-recorded videos are always hard to sit down and find the time to do compared to logging into a call. So are there ways that you can reassure yourself and that you can give them a goal at the end of it, so that you know that they've got to the end of it, they've watched it, and they are prepared for it? So it's one of the big challenges of flipped learning, is make sure that people do the flipped online side of it first. Yeah, so I think on the whole, I agree with Beth that it's best to use a combination of tools. It makes it a little bit more time consuming for you, but it probably gives them the best learning outcome. There are also tools where you can do things like work in groups to put post-it notes on a whiteboard, online virtually. So there might be there might be specific tools that would work for you for particular exercises if you don't think it's going to work well by email or with a quiz or with Zoom. So feel free to put that, if you feel that there's something more that we can dig into that, if you want to give us any more information and get a few more ideas from us and from anyone else in the room or in the Wild Hub room, then just put it as a question in the forum and we'll try and help you out a bit more.
Yeah, I agree. And I also share with you, because I was thinking of some papers I have on the Delphi method that might help you in that. So I'll share it in that room as well. Thank you so much, everyone. I know it's 11 already, and you may have some additional questions. I would encourage you to post those in our e-learning room on Wild Hub. Yeah, in any case, if you want to follow up with one of us one-on-one, please do as well. Yeah, thank you so much. We were with 17 today. I think that's really such a nice group of people. I hope this was useful to you. And let's just continue the conversation and let's stay in touch. And I'd like to thank Beth as well as Lucy very, very much for your time and for your advice. It's so nice to have you involved with this conversation. All right,
Very
thank
welcome.
you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot for organising, Tirza.
Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank
Bye
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye guys.
See you
Bye.
on Wild Hub.